One. Okay, and we'll get the Zoom. Okay, excellent. Hello, everybody. Today, I'm very pleased to have Jeff Schoep being for an interview. Jeff is a former leader of the National Socialist Movement. Jeff, how long were you in the NSM for?
Thanks for having me on the program. I was involved in the NSM for about 27 years total.
Wow, okay, 27 years. And Jeff now is working with the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, and he's fighting against the very views that he spent such a large portion of his life promoting. So, Jeff, thank you for agreeing to talk with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I want to first get some biographical insights into you, into why initially, into when you joined the National Socialist Movement and why it was attractive to you. So, and maybe that'll provide some more general insights about other cases. So, put yourself in the shoes of the younger Jeff, and why were you attracted to these ideas and ended up joining this movement?
So I joined back in the early 90s, and I was attracted to the movement from a very young age. Excuse me. I was attracted to the movement from a very young age. My grandfather fought in the German army during World War II.
Mm,
My great uncles fought as well. My mother and grandparents came over from Germany after the war. So I'm first generation here, and it wasn't something that was taught in the home or anything like that, but I did know about that history. So my journey into the movement was a little different than a lot of other Americans. I just had that fascination with that part of history, and that was the initial entry point for me. It wasn't that I was taught hate growing up or anything like
mhm.
that. It was just that historical connection.
So, um, did you know any of your relatives who fought in? So they were in the were they in the Wehrmacht or were they in the SS? What was their experience, or did you only know in very general terms that they served on the German side of the war?
No, no. My grandfather fought in the Wehrmacht. My great uncles did as well, and they all survived. One of my great uncles was captured at Stalingrad, and he was with the last group of German prisoners to make it out in a trade. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but 50s or
Wow.
60s. Yeah, he was with the
So he was
last.
evacuated by the Luftwaffe then.
No, he was put in a concentration camp in
Oh, no,
Siberia.
oh no, so he was actually captured by the Russians. Wow.
Yeah,
That's a
and
low
then
survival rate, yeah.
very low survival rate. Yeah, he was very fortunate to have made it out, and most of those guys were starved and worked to death. So he was
Mhm.
about 90 pounds from. This was before my time, but this was explained to me
Yeah,
by
it's just
family. And then my
wow.
grandparents, just passed a few years ago, but my grandmother's family, they were from Prussia, so they lost their homes and things like that
Hmm.
after the war. So I did hear some
Yeah.
of those experiences growing up, but
So
nothing about.
after the war, they were, I'm just to try to link my knowledge of history to to what in point of fact happened with your family. So they were expelled from East Prussia as part of, as that territory was annexed by Poland, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, quite an experience. So, how did they characterize their war experience to you? Was it ideological, or was it more just this was our sufferings and our struggle and our journey? How did they talk about it?
There was no talk about the ideology. That was
Hmm.
something that I ended up getting involved in on my own. So I just heard about they didn't like talking about the war or those experiences, but I kind of pressed on it because I was a very inquisitive kid and very interested in history and
Hmm.
things like that. So I pressed them a lot, to learn different stories and to hear some of their experiences. But when they did talk about it, it was just more experiences that they had, and
Hmm.
my grandfather would share battlefield experiences and things like that.
So, how did your grandfather get? Did your grandfather migrate to the United States?
Yes,
Okay, yeah, and so you're of German descent through your paternal grandfather then, or maternal grandfather? I don't know.
my mother's side, my
Yeah,
mother
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, very
Mhm.
interesting. Yeah. Did you feel any connection to the German American community as a young person? Did you participate in cultural stuff? Did you study German, or was it more was it more linked to this extraordinary wartime experience of your family?
Well, I mean, we heard German growing up and everything. My
Hmm.
grandparents spoke it, my mother spoke it, and so they, we heard it and we learned some German growing up.
Hmm.
And when I was 15, I went and stayed with one of my uncles, great uncles over there that had
Hmm.
been he was wounded in the Ardennes offensive. So the way
Wow.
I was told to find him in the airport was look for the guy with the burned off face, because he was blown up
Wow. So you
in his
have
face.
you had in your family you had Stalingrad, Battle of Stalingrad, and the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, that's pretty
Yeah.
remarkable. That must have been, yeah, that must have. I don't know. So did you always feel a connection to these people and their struggles and so on?
Yes.
Hmm, that's
Yeah.
remarkable. But they didn't try to. They didn't promote Nazi ideology or race hatred or any of these things. They talked about this was our wartime experience.
Yeah, yeah, it was basically, I was pretty much told not to ask about it, don't talk about
Mm,
it, but I still wanted to understand that family history, and I kind of pressed them. And
mm-hmm,
later years, I mean, even just about 10, it was about 10 years ago, I think, that my grandfather tried to, really talk to me and say that I should leave the movement
mm.
and all that. So, I mean, the family was definitely not supportive of me being involved in this stuff.
So this is your grandfather who fought in Stalingrad. He was still alive 10 years ago. No, okay. Sorry, was that a
No,
great
no,
grandfather?
that was a great uncle.
Okay, okay, great uncle. Yeah.
Yeah.
This guy served in the Wehrmacht still, your
All
grandfather.
through I had two great uncles and then my grandfather, and they all
Wow.
fought and in the Wehrmacht. And my grandfather just died I'm terrible with numbers, but I want to say about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're giving us a. We're not being statistically precise here. You're giving
It
us
could have
your
been six,
biography. Yeah, yeah,
but it's
yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
If it's six, we're gonna brand you a liar and ban you from the
Right,
channel forever,
exactly.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, but I find this also interesting. As somebody who studies the history. But did you feel though, like 10 years ago, your grandfather was serves in the Wehrmacht. His formative years presumably were in Nazi Germany. He's telling you to get the fuck out. Wouldn't you feel like, God, who am I to defy his moral authority in this regard? And he's looking out for your well-being too, I imagine. He's not just saying this is bad. He's looking out for your well-being, right? How do you
No, you know what?
respond to that psychologically and also just practically?
Right. I mean, that's just one aspect of it. And when he approached me with that, and I'm ashamed to say it now, but I basically I didn't. This was somebody I looked up to as a kid, and when he told me that, I said, "You might have given up, but I'll
Mm.
never quit. I will never, surrender." And basically, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I was basically implying like I'd rather live. No, I remember what I said now. It was I'd rather live my life fighting. I'd rather live one day as a lion than
The
a
Mussolini
lifetime as a lamb.
quotation. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But of course, it depends on what we consider to be a lion or a lamb. But I mean, I think the quotation's a good message. But the question is, what actually were you at the time you were in the NSM? Obviously. So,
Well, and
oh,
he had said to me, he
mhm,
goes, this movement that you're involved in is going to lead to one of two places. You're going to be killed or you're going to be put in prison. And, that
mhm,
was kind of his way of saying like, this isn't good. This isn't a good idea, what you're involved in. And I just pushed back. I wasn't ready to hear it.
right, right. So, what did it mean to you when you were in the movement? What did it mean to you to be a Nazi or neo-Nazi or National Socialist? Or what exactly did this mean in ideological terms? And did you have moral doubts about this identity even when you were in a leadership position, had been in the movement for a very long portion of your life?
Well, for me, when I joined and when I got involved, I thought I was doing something, something good, something noble. I was fighting for my people. I was fighting for this glorious cause. Is how I viewed it when I was involved in it. And it wasn't until I started, seeing how damaging it was to humanity and to other people, and really reflecting on that I was able to break free of it. But when I was involved, I'd say the last few years I was involved, I probably should have left about 2, 3 years before I did, but it's a process. And
Mhm.
I wasn't I wasn't able to do it. There was too many excuses and reasons to stay. And then I thought
Mhm.
I can change things. This is a white civil rights group. These are all the psychological things that were going through my head.
Mm.
Like I can fix this, and you can't. I was trying to put lipstick on a pig. You can't put
Mhm.
you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And
Right.
I was trying to put dress up the Nazi party into something that it could never be.
Yeah. Also, like, we're selfish, right? I think the vast majority of us have a very strong capacity for selfishness, and also a capacity for compassion and nobility and all this. I think we're a mix of these things. Pretty banal comment, but there's my brilliant insight. But you probably, when you start to have some ethical doubts about like vilifying blacks or Jews, you don't want to, as a self-interested, selfish person like all of us, you don't want to just jettison what you've built for 25 years and what is some source of income. Whereas in mainstream society, that would be difficult to find, obviously, given your background.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so uh, obviously you had a very long tenure, like 27 years or whatever. Did you ever come close to leaving the movement before this last few years? Were there ever any instances where you're like, over this, lifetime, almost not lifetime, maybe half a lifetime or a third of a lifetime, do you ever have an incident with these people where you're just like, these are scumbags, this is leading somewhere bad? Did you ever come close to leaving well before the last few years?
In about 2016, that's around the time that I feel like I should have known better and I should have left right around 2016. But I kept making those excuses like, that was what it was everything I had done my whole entire life, I mean, adult life anyways. I was involved in this movement. So it was I don't like to, say I'm afraid of anything but it was pretty scary thinking about like, well,
Mhm,
what next? You're in your 40s and you're going, well, what next?
mhm.
What's life going to look like? This is all you've ever done. And I was at the top of where I was at, and my career was rolled into it and everything else. So
Yeah,
it took a lot. It took longer than it should have for me to break away from it. But there's no excuse. I can't make any excuses for it, but I can just explain, some of the things that I was going through at the time, and reasons to stay. There was a lot more reasons to stay than there was to leave, but leaving was the right thing to do. And for me, the right thing is more important than any self-serving interests.
right. But so this gets into what some of your critics have alleged. So, first of all, there's 2 points that I think are salient in this regard. So, you left during, and this doesn't imply causality, but it still is something that I think you should be asked about. You left after you were sued, in connection with the Charlottesville rally. So people have alleged that there was some causal connection between this lawfare being waged against you by people who, understandably didn't like your politics. Um, and one and two, also this weren't you involved in this group like Parallel Networks or Light Upon Light or something? Or no?
After I got out, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. But that group was associated with, and I'm giving the other side of this. I'm going to let you respond, obviously. I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I think it's something that should be raised. That group was involved with Matthew Heimbach, who seemed to like just jump right back into these politics after saying, "Oh, I'm out," So, how would you come back at that? Both the Charlottesville lawsuit and the fact that someone else who with a similar organization went this route quickly reverted back to his former politics.
Well, I'll try to answer those in order. But first, as far as the Charlottesville thing and being sued, a number of years before that lawsuit, I was sued over something else, and I didn't leave the movement over that. So, this idea that I left over a lawsuit, or being sued, it doesn't hold any merit or any weight. And I understand, that was the narrative for some people, that it fit their narrative. But to be honest, it was a lot more difficult staying involved. The movement that I was a part of was paying for the lawyer and everything. So, and like I said, my career and job and everything was rolled into what I did as well. So here, I was one of the reasons that I was staying actually was I thought, you know what, maybe I should wait until this lawsuit's over before I leave, which I'm glad I didn't, because that dragged on for several years after I left. So, but I actually considered staying to continue fighting that. Of course, I still had to continue fighting it anyways, but it was just another complication. So, did I want to be involved in the lawsuit? Of course not. I mean, I still had to defend myself from it. But it made it a lot more complicated leaving during that lawsuit, because here I'm still having to defend myself in court, but I'm on the side of people that I've, on the side of the movement that was being sued and all that. And I've been speaking out at that time. I had already been speaking out and against white supremacy and against hate and a bias and all this kind of stuff. So that put me in a pretty precarious situation. So the idea that I left over being sued, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I lost a lot more leaving and taking that chance than I would have staying and continuing fighting it. So it's a narrative, that is being spun. It's just like online people say I read the Mein Kampf in the 4th grade. That's not true either, but they still say it online. So, people say whatever they want.
Very few people. I mean, if I'll just comment really quickly. If people had read Mein Kampf, particularly like Slavic Americans who joined the Nazi movement, they would not be joining the movement. Like, very few people would be, if they were familiar with Hitler's worldview, would be um, calling themselves neo-Nazis, in my view. Okay, so yeah, I hear your answer there. Why is Christian Picciolini, who is one of the most like prominent anti-hate or whatever Nazi people, why is he so suspicious of your motives? Can you unpack and respond to that? Why he basically says you're a fraud. You're not really you haven't really rejected your old views. What's his angle there? What is there? Can you, even obviously you're not going to agree with it, but do you think that there's some foundation for his confusion in this regard if you don't agree with him?
Well, I don't think he's confused at all, but I'm going to be very careful on how I word this. But because I can't speak for why somebody does what they do. But you had asked about parallel networks, and originally when I had left the movement, Christian had reached out to me, and he says, hey, I'm here. You want to talk, et cetera, et cetera. So I talked with him a few times, and then I went on. He had a TV show that he was doing. This was back in 2019, and I went on that, and then I was I was speaking at a thing in Turkey with
Oh,
parallel networks, and I was on my way to Turkey, and the guy that was running parallel networks and Christian got into some kind of online argument. And Christian says to me, he says, if you're going to work with him, I'm not working with you. And I said, no one tells me who I can and can't work with. I'm sorry you feel that way, but if that's how you feel, I'm sorry. I'd like to work with you, but that's all there is to it. And since then, that was in 2019. That's the last time I spoke to him. And since then, he has contacted my employers. He has contacted I could go on, and I have the receipts to prove this, but he contacts my employers, tells them I'm a Nazi, has said that I was a Nazi online over and over and over again on social media. So I don't know what the guy's problem is. I mean, I can, tell you my opinion. I think he's got some psychological issues. I think he's got some untreated psychological issues that haven't been taken care of, but that's just my opinion.
yeah. Also, one thing that, and now this is another question. One concern I have about de-radicalization organizations, there are many. I mean, the overall project of like getting people who have far right views, like deprogramming them from Nazism, from race hatred, getting them to see blacks and Jews as fellow citizens. This is all to the good, obviously. But I have concerns about like the industry as such, and one of them is it seems like there's a very narrow way that's defined for people in Piccoloni's view, be like an ex-Nazi or ex-radical, ex-extremist, right? And it shouldn't be like that. You should be able to be an ex-extremist who votes Republican, right? As long as you don't black people or work against black people or work against Jews or etc. Right?
Yep.
Whereas Piccolini seems to think you have to be like whoa, or you're still a Nazi. So I'd be a Nazi in his view, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And well, and this is a big problem, and it's not just, and not just to pick on him, but there's a lot of people that feel that way, and there's a lot of organizations. I
mhm.
shouldn't say a lot, but there's some organizations that do the kind of work that we do in countering extremism and things like that. And they're just stacked with political activists and
Mhm,
like woke and far left activists.
mhm,
And the thing is, this is the reason why I started a nonprofit called Beyond Barriers, and I do work with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, as you mentioned at the beginning. But Beyond Barriers, the nonprofit that we formed, was to tackle this problem that you don't have a lot of. I sure didn't have any support when I left, and really anybody to talk to. And I ended up talking to that guy, and then I'm a Nazi because he didn't like who I was associating with, or things like that, or what I was saying. So I want to share this, and I think this is important for this conversation. When I first left, and when I decided to start speaking out in 2019, and we released the jeffschoep.com website, all these people were contacting me. And this was the reason why we started Beyond Barriers, because I could not keep up with all the people that were reaching out, asking for help, asking, how do you do it? And the biggest question they had, and I'm talking not like one or two or three, but like one after another. If I leave the movement, this is that, the people that are writing in, if I leave the movement, do I have to become a communist? Do I have to join Antifa? Do I have to be far left? And this was, and I thought, man, what am I saying that's making people think that?
right,
And it wasn't anything that I was saying. I had to reel myself back to
mhm,
how I thought about the people that were leaving too. I automatically, and just about everybody thinks this, it's all in black and white. If you
mhm,
leave the far right, you have to flip to the other extreme. And it's not true, for one. and
mhm,
and there was nobody really saying these things. So I'm new on that side of things,
mhm,
and I'm calling out this stuff, and I'm criticizing people, and I try not to do that anymore, but just instead of criticizing them, I try to give them a viable alternative, because there's so many people that think that. So if you're working in a counter extremism organization, and you're woke, you're far left, whatever you want to call it, and you're telling people like, hey, you got to be like this, most of those people, and this is from my experience and from the last years I've been doing this,
mhm,
most of them will say, two middle fingers up, and they'll go right
mhm,
back to what they were doing, and they will not come out. And a lot
right.
of them, so we try to stay nonpartisan, say you can be right or left, but don't be on those extremes, and don't hate people.
Right, exactly. And frankly, you know, what's strange to me about this is if you say as a prerequisite for repudiating anti-black racism, or as a prerequisite for appreciating the role of African Americans in our society, right? And contributing to our society. As a prerequisite for that, you have to be like a leftist politically and engage in like casual dismissive talk about straight white males or whatever, or support affirmative action. I mean, like, no, you don't. I mean, that's and the problem with that is, with this narrative, is you're limiting the number of people you can de-radicalize them, because some people will accept a far left or a more left wing interpretation, and others will not. But the goal should be to get people to renounce racism and anti-Semitism, and dehumanizing other people, right? I mean, that should be the core goal. The core goal shouldn't be like, okay, you have to adopt a politics that nobody would have agreed with in like 2000, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right, and that's why I liked and work with the Simon Wiesenthal Center as well, is because that's how they view it. It's like, if you're not an anti-Semite and you're not hating people, who really cares where your politics align, and so we found some kindred spirits there in that, and we've helped a lot of people walk away from the movement, and they're just, it seems like everybody is just surprised, like, wow, I can still have conservative viewpoints, or things like that, and it's like, yes, you can. And you're right, some go to the left, some stay on the right. It doesn't really matter if they're out of that form of extremism, one way or the other. That's great. And if you flip from one extreme to the other extreme, you are not a de-radicalized individual. That's just somebody that's switching their forms of extremism.
I'm sorry, I have to plug in my microphone. Give me just 1 second. It just got unplugged. So we're a little boomer tech here, unfortunately. God, this. Okay, Jeff, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, yeah, fully agreed with that sentiment. And I mean, all the criticism that you may get, and I'm gonna have to ask you tougher questions because I'm signing with you too much, which will bore the audience if I do. But I'll agree on this point. The All the criticism you get, I think that these organizations need to reflect on how effective actually are we at deprogramming Nazis and far right, because that should be their goal. They should want less of these people, in society. So I guess this leads to another question. Like, one could argue that, okay, these are vile views and so on, but who cares? Like, why should we be so concerned about de-radicalizing these people? They're not going to take political power. Why don't we just ignore this lunatic fringe? And why are your activities worth supporting? How would you respond to that argument? Why does it matter that these people are out there, neo Nazis or whatever?
Well, and this might be an interesting answer, but I'm all for free speech. I always have been, always will be. I think free speech is important. It's one of the cornerstones of being an American.
Hmm.
And we should have free speech. But when that line crosses from free speech into, calls for violence or things like that or illegal activity, that's where the line should be drawn. And the vast majority of people that are in these extremist groups maybe are not prone to violence or things like that. But one thing that I noticed that also was one of the reasons why I got out is because there was so many people, and I say so many, but it's not like the majority of the people that are involved in it, but there is people involved in it that have taken things to extreme levels, like the synagogue shooters, mosque shooters, church shooters, the people that are promoting this, killing others and things like that.
Hmm.
So there's too many people that were applauding that sort of thing and
Hmm.
getting behind that. So that's really where the biggest concern is for me. Is I look at it from this standpoint. It's not about de-radicalizing that one person. One guy here or there, but it's about how many innocent lives can we save if we off ramp the next mass shooter.
Yeah, so that's kind of the take I have too. That it's not like politically, presumably these guys are going to be continue to be irrelevant, but it's more of a risk of a safety risk, right, to themselves or to others. That de-radicalization is good because you're essentially preventing violent crime. On this subject, couple questions. So, in private with these neo-Nazi people, is the rhetoric like blatantly murderous, talking about killing Jews and blacks and so on, or does it depend? And if so, how could you have, for decades, as the presumably civilized man sitting in front of me now, how could you have implicitly condoned such like thuggery and this promotion of violence against the innocent, you know?
So, in regards to that question, it really depends on the group that one's involved with. The organization that I was involved with, illegal activity was discouraged, and that's the reason why the organization had been around for so many years. It was a continuation of the movement of George Lincoln Rockwell. It had been around. NSM itself had been, well, Rockwell's movement started back in the 50s. NSM started in 73, 74. And of course, I wasn't around in it back then, but it was held to strict legal standards. So if someone came around over the years, and this did happen, where people would come around and they'd say, we should go do this, and they'd
Mhm,
advocate some sort of illegal activity. They would, my policy was basically you get one warning, because a lot of times that's a young person that's trying to impress the older people in the organization because they think that's what you want to hear. And I would shut it down and I'd say, no, one of two things. If you're talking like that, you're a paid informant of some sort, or you're somebody that's going to get locked up or get us all sent to prison. So you've got one. This was your one
mhm,
warning. You just used it up. If anybody reports that you're saying some stuff like that again, you're thrown out. And
mm.
that happened a lot.
Was that though, was there, when you talk, like when you in your like internal monologue, was there any moral salience to this, or was it just pragmatic, like we don't want to get thrown into prison? Like, do you think it
That's a
was,
good question.
yeah, go
That's a
ahead.
good question. I would love to say it came from a moral
Hmm.
standpoint, but over the years, that was just more of
Hmm.
to protect the organization, because that was the most important
Right.
thing, was to keep moving forward with the message. And I would love to say it came from a moral standpoint, but I never did advocating murdering people or anything like that.
Okay. Do you think that the ideology, though, in a more abstract way, so I understand that you condemned crimes, but in a more abstract way, do you think the ideology of the group promoted genocide at some future point, or murder or revenge, even short of genocide? Or would you agree with that characterization, or is it hard to say?
There was It's kind of a delicate thing to answer, because the way that a lot of that sort of thing was addressed was basically that if the United States collapsed, whether it was through race war, civil war, or anything like that, if there was no more system, then there would be no laws to stop people from, it would be complete anarchy. And I don't mean like this leftist anarchy
Right,
stuff,
right,
but
right,
like real anarchy, like you just kill people and do whatever. So it was kind of trying to articulate the best. It was like, if the system collapses, then it's a free for all type of thing, was for lack of a better term.
right. Yeah. When you think about these episodes of terrorism, obviously, like, I'm not accusing you of murder or anything like that. Murder has a specific legal term, and it's a specific legal meaning, and you obviously haven't killed anybody or said kill this person. So I'm not accusing you of that. But obviously, short of murder, do you feel like, which again, you're not, do you feel like you have some, in a more abstract or philosophical sense, some kind of moral responsibility for um, for terrorist episodes that were inspired by your ideology? And is that part of why you want to move people away from it today?
What's a really good question. You know, I feel like the ideology in some cases, and I didn't start really seeing this until the last couple years I was in, but the ideology in some cases, where a lot of people can adhere to the ideology and not go do crazy things or evil things. They just have those thoughts
Mhm.
and beliefs. And there's other people, whether they've had some trauma in their life, or maybe they're slightly mentally unstable, or they have some other kind of issues, or they're psychopaths or sociopaths. They take the ideology and they'll utilize that, whether willingly or unwillingly, and they'll go and cause harm to others. And this was something that I was just starting to see in those last few years, where I was having to make policies towards the end of my time there for social media, like, hey, telling the members, you can't post genocidal stuff or hateful stuff on social media. And it was before, it was always like, well, shouldn't everybody just know better? That's not, you shouldn't post that kind of stuff. We were actually having to put in writing policies for the membership. And it was like, why am I doing this? Why am I, if you have to tell somebody this. I remember one guy in particular, and this was a party
Mhm.
member, and he had posted something about like a mosque burning or something like that. I got a lot of times it would go through the chain of command, but I called this guy myself and I was like, dude, what is wrong with you? Why would you post that? And he says, I didn't make the meme. I just reposted it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you missed the whole point. You can't post stuff like that.
It's interesting
And
how, so some of these people, I presume, who were psychologically, yeah, they're freaks and so on, but some of them, I presume, were not freaks. We're not, by which I mean like people who are deranged, like, so people who are incapable of, like, having compassion for another person, or presume some of these people were psychologically normal in the broad sense, and they just managed to pull a lever where their compassion for Jews or blacks or whatever just goes off somehow. They, like, get into a certain mode. Does that sound about right? Or are the people who advocate this just all kind of messed up psychologically?
no, no. The
Yeah.
thing is it's the minority. It's the minority of them that have the severe psychological issues,
Hmm.
like your psychopaths and sociopaths would
Hmm.
be somebody that doesn't have compassion for others. That's actually the minority. That's actually a small percentage of the people in it, but it's enough that they've caused some serious damage across the globe. But believe it or not, most of the people, much like myself, they truly believe that they're doing something good and noble, and there's a psychological block, and that's why we called
Hmm.
beyond barriers, because you have to get beyond that barrier to be able to see the humanity in others. And
Right.
once you start dehumanizing people, you lose your own humanity in the process. So you're not seeing their humanity, but you lost yours also. And until that's reconnected and you start seeing the humanity of the people that you're dehumanizing and demonizing, it's hard to get through that. So you're kind of trapped behind these barriers, or in an echo chamber or a bubble where you
Right.
can't see beyond that.
What groups was the like race hatred dehumanization most directed at? Was it like blacks, Jews, basically everybody who's non-white? And yeah, so how was there like some hierarchy of we hate these people the most or these people are the worst or no? Was it
It
basically
kind of
every?
it kind of varies group to group, but in the group that I was involved in the NSM, it was anti-Semite. It was
That's
anti-Semitic. It
too
was the Jews.
surprising for NSM. Yeah. So what were
Right.
like the
That should be no
theories?
surprise, right?
Yeah, yeah. What were like the theories you guys had about Jews? And did you ever just reflect on them and say, leave aside moral questions, like this stuff, these theories don't make sense, or they're factual problems or logical problems in them, or they don't accord with my practical experience of Jews, or did while you were in the movement, did this stuff seem really plausible to you, and you're like, yeah, this is true, this is just how the world is.
It seemed totally plausible
Mm,
to me. And I mean, it's not something I'm proud of now. I work fairly closely with the Jewish community, and a lot of my friends are Jewish today. But I didn't really know any Jewish people when I was involved. So here
mhm.
I'm dehumanizing and demonizing people in a culture I didn't even know. And I would be say, oh, Jeff Schoep is an expert on the Jews. I didn't know nothing. I mean, I
They
thought I
said that
did.
they
I
thought of you
thought I
as the
did,
expert in the Jews, so that's pretty funny. Yeah.
right?
Uh,
Yeah. I didn't know nothing.
yeah.
It was really an eye opener, and that was a really a bitter pill to swallow. Instead of Jews would be blamed for everything in the environment that I was involved in. It's unfortunate.
It just seems to me the reason I'm surprised that weren't ever intellectually skeptical, and well, obviously you reject it now, is like it just seems to me so obvious that people doing like the JQ or Judenfrage, to use German word, discourse, the confirmation bias just seems so obvious. They're like collecting anecdotes to justify this theory of the Jew, right? They're not. It just seems so obvious that they're not like observing Jewish behavior and trying to compile what they see. That they're like saying, let's find some Jewish pedophiles, or let's find some Jews who are obsessed with making whites a minority. Let's find some Jews who are really ethnocentric. It just doesn't. It just seems so obvious that it's not like a statistical or scientific project, you know. But you bought into it at the time. What?
Yeah, and most of them do, and it's
Hmm.
unfortunate because it is confirmation bias, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what it is. And it's hard to break free of that, and it's like one of the things that I've done in with de-radicalizing other people and talking to them is a lot of them are surprised that there's all these conservative Jews and people that are on the right that are Jewish, and it's like it should be a no-brainer, right? But of course there is. But it's like, yeah, if they find some Jewish people that are involved in some terrible things, well, you can find just as many white people, just as many black people, you name it. It has nothing to do
Hmm.
with religion or the skin pigment or anything like that. It's just
And well, here's an example though. So they'll bring up Jews involved in like child, sex with minors or whatever. Like, there was in the 60s and 70s, there's all these rock stars who, had relationships with minors, right? This is like if you're interested in the history of rock and roll, you'll find big names. And these guys weren't Jewish, you know. So they just or like to go on another vein, like you have like the Frankfurt School, which is an intellectual movement that's Jewish and leftist, important, influential, but they don't talk about like the French postmodernists, guys like Foucault, right, or the French existentialists. Guys like Sartre and Camus, who are not very influential and not leftist and not Jewish. So yeah, just to me it seems just pretty obvious cherry picking. But when you're programmed, whether it's religious fundamentalism or Islamism or you know, um, neo-Nazi, then you're kind of just an autopilot, on confirmation bias, which is a problem for all of us, right? Confirmation bias and vanity, like not wanting to admit you're wrong, it's a problem we all have, and it's going up to the millionth degree when you're in like a cult, basically. So how did you get in this group? Why were you picked as a leader, and when did you get a leadership position? Did they just say, "Oh, Scoop, you're brave or you're cleverer than most of us"? Like, why were you isolated as a potential leader, and how do you become one as opposed to just a follower? And were there advantages to this? Did you get like did you get like female attention? Did you get money? Or was it just like barely scraping by, kind of a grim existence?
Well, when I joined, I never had any intention of being the leader or anything like that. And I can tell you, as far as like later on in the years when I was there, because when I first joined the organization, it was pretty small. And by the time I left, it was the largest Nazi party in the country. Now I don't think it's not anymore, but um, it was. And the guy that was running it had been with Rockwell, Commander Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party. He had worked under him, and he was ready to retire and basically said, hey, I'm retiring, I think you're the person for the job. And I just remember like thinking, oh my god, like, no, this is terrible. But at the same time, I felt like a sense of purpose or duty to do it, so I could have said no. I wish I would have, but I took it on, and he still stayed on kind of to mentor me and stuff, and we stayed in touch over the years. Excuse me. But so then I just I built the organization up with a lot of other people, and went from there. And then I guess the other part of your question was, when you're involved in it, for different groups it's different. Some of the groups are very very good at raising money and things like that. And the group I was in was mostly blue collar working class people, so there was not a
Mhm.
lot of money there. But in the last number of years, there was a lot more than there was in the early years. I remember scraping up change to go make leaflets and things like that. And those years were long gone, but so there was more finances, but not like big money like what's in some of the groups. So it really just kind of depends on the group. And I guess a person could say that there was power in a sense. There's, if you look for things that are attractive in it, or the things that are a draw, I'm sure you can find them, but there's much better things to do than that. It's not a good lifestyle for anybody to be involved in. I couldn't tell you how many people I knew that lost their lives, went to prison forever, or hurt somebody else,
Was
or took their
suicide
own life.
common or not so
I
much?
do. There was a few. I know a few people that committed suicide, unfortunately,
Hmm.
but I don't know if the percentage is any higher in that than in something else. I wouldn't
Right,
have a answer on that, but
right.
unfortunately, I do know some people that killed themselves. Yes.
Mm. How important was so what was like the whole National Socialist, which obviously is evoking the Nazis, all technically it's broader than that, but if we're talking about how language is used, when you talk about National Socialism, you're evoking the Nazis, of course. There's obviously more of an intellectual history to that, but that's what you're evoking. So is there were people like reading Mein Kampf? Were they reading, like, I guess, Rosenberg, Goebbels? Were they reading these people? Were they like trying to be intellectually serious Nazis, or was it just like an aesthetic, or a wrapper that they put around their politics, their anti-Jew stuff, and their white supremacy or whatever?
It depends. Some of the people were, intellectual, and were studying all that stuff, and reading it, and were well educated on it. Others were just sort of like just involved and didn't have a clue about the ideology and things like that, or they would look to the
Hmm.
group to kind of provide that. So it really depend on an individual to individual basis.
I guess relatedly, how important was, because this is where I'm interested, because I spent a lot of my time debunking Holocaust now. I'm actually even debating against Holocaust. This is something that's controversial in my neck of the woods. Like now, being a PhD student with a master's in academia, like how could you debate Holocaust knows? How could you engage them? You should just ignore them, etc. But um, I'm actually debating Mike Enoch. You probably know who that is on Saturday on Holocaust Style. But in any case, how important was Holocaust denial or and kind of revisionism about the cause or denial about the cause of World War II and Hitler's motives for attacking Poland, let's say? How important was that to the movement? Or was it not really that important?
Holocaust denial is definitely an entry point for a lot of this
Hmm.
stuff. So, so the people that are engaged in that, I was a Holocaust denier as well. I didn't believe it happened in the way that they said it did. And that was for me, at first when I first joined, because in school they had taught us that it happened and all that. And I thought, well, there must have been a reason, is the way I looked at it. And then
Hmm.
when I came across Holocaust denial, when I started studying and researching everything I could find about the movement, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. And
Mm.
that's that confirmation bias once again.
Hmm.
So it gave me, it was like another bullet in the clip, so to speak,
Mm.
of propaganda or ideologically. Like, okay, well, if they're lying about this, what else are they lying about? And all of a sudden, you're like wrapped up into this hyper paranoia where you don't believe anything, because you don't believe that. And so it can be an entry point for people. So it is dangerous, and I think it does need to be debunked, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely my view. I've actually managed to deprogram a few people who believed in Holocaust denial, and now, like one of them, for example, well, I shouldn't mention more details about him, but my experience is he's a little paranoid about like, oh, don't say anything, even though, yeah, so I won't. Um, but there. I think when you take that away, there becomes it's a pillar of the belief system, of the neo-Nazi belief system. So if they believe the Holocaust happened, they start to question other things. And I think you have to take some pillar of belief away, whether it's black people are terrible or Jews are terrible. If you take or Holocaust didn't happen, if you take that pillar away, then they start to ask questions for themselves. The confirmation bias erodes. And I think then if they're an intellectually curious person with it's psychologically normal, they may be, they may get rid of it, get rid of the rest of the ideology by themselves. So it is interesting, though, the Holocaust denial is very widespread and important in the movement, right?
Well, and I
Um,
want to say too about de-radicalization. Us that are those of us that are working in that field, we don't, and Daryl Davis, my brother, and a colleague at
mhm,
Beyond Barriers, they'll say in the papers and things like that, Daryl Davis has de-radicalized 200 plus Klansmen and things like that. But
mm,
If you ask Daryl, he'll say, I didn't de-radicalize anyone. And I say the
mhm,
same thing. We're giving them the tools to be able to do that themselves. Because
mhm,
if someone feels like they were made to change, like say your spouse or a family member is pressuring you, like get out of this, we don't want you in this, I'll take your kids if you don't get out. And believe me, I ran across a lot of that over the years. The change isn't real. It's not in here. It's not in the heart. It's not in the mind. It's just they're just doing it
mm,
because they have to. If you want real change, it's got to be in the heart and mind, and
right.
they have to feel like they're doing it themselves. We help them. We facilitate it. We give them different ways of
Mhm.
looking at things, and just like what you're doing with debunking Holocaust deniers, one like you said, once you crack that doorway open, that's the space for change, and they have to be able to
Right.
do it
They have to
themselves.
push. You can unlock the door, but they have to push it. It's not going to
You
be
got it.
intellectually or psychologically satisfying if you just, tell them this is what you believe. And I think that's another problem with these woke mainstream de-radicalization organizations because basically you're saying, okay, for someone who says, you know what, I'm really questioning my views about these people I vilified, then you say, okay, then you have to believe in all these other bad ideas and you have to like casually rib on whites. I guess this leads to another question. This is going to be a more controversial question, but that's what I like, so I don't care. Do you think that, first of all, two things. Do you think, three things actually, because I'm going to tie this to you. Do you think that anti-white attitudes are a problem, one, in the United States? Two, do you think that like, whether we're talking about discrimination and employment and education, scholarship with like affirmative action, or like message about white people that's sometimes portrayed in the media, bullying, so on. One, do you think it's a problem? Two, do you think that it contributes to, obviously does not justify, no one's saying that, but contributes to people being pushed into these or embracing these, hate-filled worldviews, extremist worldviews too. And then three, do you feel in light of your past, which you're obviously ashamed of and you want to make amends for it. I can tell that just looking at you, Jeff, honestly, that you care. You feel like you're somehow inhibited from outlining this critique, right? Like talking about the problem of uh, anti-white sentiment. That you're inhibited from doing that because of your past as somebody who was anti-black, anti-Jew, etc. Go ahead. Three questions. I want to hear your answer.
Ah, well, I do think that there's a lot of focus right now in the public sphere on race matters and placing the blame. It was just Martin Luther King even said, he says a man should be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And I'm seeing a lot of, and everybody knows the racism that comes from the right, but a
Hmm.
lot of people don't know about the racism that's coming from the left, and some of that anti-white sentiment, or blaming, you hear these terms now, cis white males, cis,
Yeah.
white people doing this and white people doing that. Unfortunately, when you start talking like that and you start using that kind of language, I mean, switch it around. Like if somebody was saying that
Right.
about black people, that's racism. So
Or
why is
I
it?
mean, the excuse they give, I'll interject. The excuse they give is that okay, it's not racism because of power differentials. But if you go to Japan, it's absurd. If you apply this to other contexts, so like in Japan, the Japanese are on top, right? Best workers aren't treated very well there. It's a great society. I want to just bash Japan, but there is a racism there. It doesn't mean you cannot be racist against Japanese. That's fucking ridiculous. Of course you can, and you can also be racist against white people. Go ahead, finish your answer. I just wanted to
No,
make
I
that
mean
point.
racism can go any different way. I
Yeah.
don't believe in this stuff where, oh, if that people of color can't be racist.
Yeah.
Most of the people of color that I know, they'll tell you, oh yes, they can.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know. So I mean, and yeah, and there is a bit of a stigma for somebody like me to speak about that kind of thing, but nobody could control me before
Mm-hmm.
when I was speaking out, when I was in the movement. And and I say this about like the doubters too. It's like nobody doubted, and this was told to me by a professor that I know, and he says nobody doubted you when you were a Nazi. You were wrong in what you believed in, but nobody doubted you. Now all of a sudden you're doing something else with your life, for the last how many years, and there's all these questions. Well, maybe he's doing it for this reason, maybe he's doing it for that reason. He goes, I don't have no questions. He says, you were honest. Even though you were wrong, you're honest. And I've been as honest and transparent as possible. So if people don't like it and they got a problem with it, tough. Like I'm not gonna bend or say something that's not true, because if that
Mm-hmm.
was the case, then I should have just stayed where I was at and just keep doing what I was doing, and living a lie. I can't do that. I have to
Mm-hmm.
speak from the heart, from what I believe in. And I will call these things out when I
Right.
see them, because I think
And
it's
if you
dangerous and it's bad for our country.
it's bad, it's not only bad for the country, but it's bad for the very specific cause that you're engaged in, which is to say, if you said, look, what this is about, what de-radicalization is about, is treating fellow citizens with respect, abandoning your race hatred, favoring equal rights, recognizing the contribution of blacks, Jews, etc., to the country. It's not about being woke or talking about white cis male. It's that you can if you want, but that's not. I mean, you're still kind of. I would agree with you that you're still basically a radical if you're doing that, but
Mhm.
that's not what this is about. But simply for saying that, people are going to say you're still, you're just you're engaged in the long game, as it were, to try to yeah. And I think that would be the view of somebody like Piccolini and a lot of people like SPLC, ADL. But I think I think that you have to say what you think is true, certainly. So
Well,
I'm
it's
going to.
it's dangerous rhetoric. I mean, think about it. If you're telling somebody you got to leave the movement and you need to come and
Uh-huh.
change your whole political ideology on top of it, and go to the far left, they're not going to do it. And we're seeing
Hmm.
we're seeing more and more people that are using things like that as an excuse. So it makes me wonder why. What is the goal here? First of all, we're nonprofits. We're supposed to be nonpartisan,
Hmm.
and we are nonpartisan. Everybody can have their own political beliefs. You can be right, you can be left, but be nonpartisan in this work. You are not going to have somebody that's on the far extreme left talking to somebody that's coming out of the far right and think that's going to work. I mean, it's idiotic. It's like almost like they're I don't want to speculate, but like why? It
Right.
doesn't
It's
work.
like, I mean, and what bothers me with these organizations too, and I also would cite that in the context of like, combating Holocaust denial. It seems like they don't ever reflect. They're interested in like, doing a woke slam dunk on their opponents rather than like what actually is effective at persuading people, right? And it doesn't. I mean, it just would seem to me that like if an organization like the SPLC or ADL, the core kind of measure of success is how effective are we at reducing the incidence of anti-black, anti-Jewish, so on sentiment. And it doesn't seem like they're interested in that. As I say, they want to like, have like, wow, I was more politically correct than you moment. So yeah, that's sort of my view. But okay, so let's go to 2017, actually, the Unite the Right rally. So, what was the role of you and your group there? How did you guys work with the other big names that were at the rally, like David Duke, Richard Spencer, I guess Mike Enoch, my future debate foe? What was the role of the NSM in that? And um, what was your experience there like?
Hmm. Well, what my role was, or what the NSM's role was, um, asking me and asking the court might be two different answers. But so I was accused of being an organizer, but every rally that I'd organized for 25 plus, I was leader of the NSM for 25 years. Every single one of those, not one person was from the NSM was ever arrested at any one of those rallies. I'm not saying anybody from the NSM was never arrested, because there was plenty of arrests, but not at political rallies. There was a strict code of conduct. You couldn't attack somebody if you could defend yourself if you were hit, but you couldn't hit first or anything like that. So those same rules and regulations carried wherever the NSM went, under my direction. To that had to be followed. So as far as Charlottesville was concerned, I wasn't on the speakers list. They didn't want me to speak. I didn't get along with the alt-right, and the alt-right didn't care for me and the
Mm.
NSM either.
Was that
So
like a class thing? Because you mentioned that you are you're from a working class background. Most of your people are working class in the when you were in the NSM. Then you have these guys like Richard Spencer and even like the TRS people who are more, just a different culture. Was there like a culture clash with these guys that made it hard for you to work together?
that's a big part of it. And we saw the alt-right as really having kind of a fluid ideology. You had everything, in there. You had exceptions for different people that probably wouldn't have been accepted in like the hard right groups like NSM. And, I won't pick on Spencer in particular, or anybody. I don't like to name people, but I'll talk in generalizations. A lot of them, we saw them as kind of like, if you come in and you're snobby and you look down on people because they lack finances, or they come from poor working class families, and you're mocking them, and you think, oh, you have to look this way or dress this way, and your haircut better be nice, and all these things, like the alt-right, we just looked at them as like, those are the kind of guys that get beat up in our circles. I'm just saying, like, I'm putting myself back there at that time. I'm not saying
It's,
that now, and that it's a
I know
good
I
thing,
found that humorous, to
but
be
they would get
honest.
beat up. They would.
Yeah, and I look, I talked to Richard. Richard's a very smart guy. I hope Richard continues to move away from the views he had. So I'm not trying to like just pick on Richard. I just find like the clash rather humorous, and the fact that you guys would would throw down potentially with some of the more how should I put this, cosmopolitan alt-right types, let's say.
That's an old thing though, that goes back even to like the movement in Europe and things like that, where the like in Britain, where they had a split between the suits and the ties and the skinheads back in the 90s, and things like that. So I
Hmm.
mean, this has been going on for a very, very long time. And I don't say that as any sort of I'm not trying to pick on Richard or anybody else for
Hmm.
that matter. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of how it was, is that we just those hard right groups, not all of them, but specifically NSM and like some of the skinhead groups, they just didn't like a lot of those people, because it was a class thing. It was a class
Hmm.
war thing. Yeah, stupid.
Yeah. So were you guys like committed to like a left wing kind of economic platform given the working class element? Did you kind of have the but you'll understand this, but to speak a little more pedantically, like the Strasserist view of National Socialism as like pro worker or whatever?
Well, yeah. Well, you mentioned Matt Heimbach earlier, and
Uh-huh.
his group was more Strasserite leaning.
Okay.
National Socialist movement was more traditional National Socialist. So
Hitlerite.
Hitlerite, yeah, more Hitlerite.
Okay.
So that was the difference between the two groups. So um, you had that difference. But when people would ask that question when I was involved in the movement, my answer was always the NSM takes the best of the left and the best of the right and combines it. So the group was hated by the right and hated by the left. So it was in a little bit of a different place.
I see, yeah. So I'm gonna look at to see if I have any more questions I've forgotten to ask, and if not, I think we'll move to we've covered a lot of ground. I think we'll move to the audience questions. Um, do- oh, this is a good question. Do you still have relationships you care about with people who remain in this movement? Obviously, your politics have changed, but are there still people that you feel a deep connection to, friends, people you care about, you love, right? That are in this, that are still in the movement? And have you tried to, how has that worked, balancing friendship with the idea that you're like a traitor or whatever, you know?
Yeah, it's a tough one. When you leave, and especially you can leave and go from most of the groups. Some will come after you or things like that, the more extreme ones, more gang type organizations. But you can leave and walk away and not have any issues. But when you speak out, yes, a lot of them do view you as a traitor. So when I started speaking out, I lost most of those friends. Most of the people that I knew that were involved in it, to be like, oh, he's a traitor, I'm not talking to him. There's some people that will still reach out and things like that. And the way I look at that is I'm not slamming my door on anybody. If somebody's making threats or something like that, that's a different story. But if someone's just, running their mouth or asking questions, I feel like that's an opportunity to engage somebody that maybe, they're curious. Maybe they're curious about themselves changing and stuff. And I've had a couple of cases, and I won't say who, but I've had a couple of cases of people in situations like that have changed, and and some that are still kind of there, but they're changing. They're slowly changing, and it took time for me to have the strength to walk away. So I have to leave that space for other people too. So I'll engage with just about anybody, as long as they're not making threats or something like that.
Are threats common, like credible? We're not talking about, I mean, sometimes there is a satirical note to these. So it's like if you look at Poll, you know, saying kill yourself, I mean, that's it's not serious. But do you get threats that you would regard as credible, like your life or your physical safety, your property, or not so much? Is that not something you're encounter very much because of the fact that you're a trader or whatever?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I look at it is, that's a tough one to answer, because you never know what somebody's really thinking. Are they going to go through with it or something like that? I mean, being involved in that life for so many years, I was always on guard, always ready for anything, because you could deal with a situation at any time. That aspect hasn't changed. So it's like, if somebody thinks they're going to come and do something, it's not going to work out too well for them. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a line that you have to defend vigorously while, of course, engaging with people. So, actually, one thing that I should ask about before we get to Q&A is how, like, can you talk a little bit about you alluded to it, but can you talk about the major, your, how you were de-radicalized or you radicalized yourself? What were the major intellectual reasons and what were the main relationships and conversations that led you to repudiate your life essentially, right?
So for me, it was being able to see the humanity in some of the people that I dehumanized. It was meeting Daryl Davis. It was meeting a lady by the name of Dia Khan, who's a Muslim, and them sharing with me some of their very interpersonal stories and things that happened to them growing up, and how racism and hate affected them as children. And I didn't think about those things. Like, it's not that I was stupid and that I didn't, have those thoughts, but I always blocked them out. They were always on the other side of that barrier. Like, they don't matter because they're not my people. But when you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with somebody and they're sharing that stuff, the deeply personal stuff with you, and you're looking at them face to face, eye to eye, and hearing that,
Mhm.
it doesn't sit right. So that them sharing those vulnerabilities and getting to know them as people, that opened up the floodgate for me, and it made that space for change. And that's what I try to we call it
Mhm.
at Beyond Barriers, we call that relational dialogue, and it's a
Mhm.
program that we have
And
that
with Dia to add like a little grain of cynicism, and then I'm questioning your authenticity, but Dia is a very attractive woman, so that probably, helps the conversations from a male perspective. But yeah, I mean, when
she's
you if you
gorgeous,
see
right?
sincere if you see sincere uh, people who are morally serious, who are interested in you, who are compassionate, one is black and one is South Asian, right? It is difficult, I imagine, after a conversation like that, you have to do some rationalization to try to to try to write these people off, right? You'd have to really do some rationalization to say, well, they actually are of lower moral character than the white people I'm around, when at least, if you look at the direct evidence of experience, it isn't the case, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that are involved, they have those experiences too, because I remember, over the years, a lot of people would say, well, there's this black guy at my work and he works harder than, half the other people there,
You have to
you
like
know?
find a way to intellectually dismiss it, right?
Yeah. So
Because
you always
because
say,
you
well, that's
can't
the
you can't
exception.
okay, you'd say it's the exception. That's how
Yeah.
you'd cope with it, yeah. Because I mean, maybe the people I listen to are even more extreme, but it seems like were there exceptions with Jews or no? Were they all evil? What was the view of that? Or it's hard to say.
That's a
'Cause it
tough
seems
one
like the
because
view of Jews is just okay. Go ahead, yeah, yeah.
that was and this again, this varies from group to group, and it's not an individual to individual too. So for some, they'll say all of them were bad, even the kids and things like that. They would just say they're all bad, they're all evil, and it's hard to comprehend that, and it's hard to comprehend that I was one of those people that kind of viewed the
Yeah, there's
world.
no empirical evidence for this. There's not like
No,
data showing Jews are more cruel or Jews are greedier. I mean, there are these tropes that have existed historically, but I mean, they even historically though they haven't been cashed out in racial terms until very recently, right? Like a Jew who converted to Christianity in Christendom was not considered to be like corrupted, by his Jewishness, right? So, I mean, in some sense, these are old ideas, some sense they're new ideas, but in any case, what I think happened with these people and you is it just was difficult to maintain certain ideas of how non-whites are in the face of these conversations that were interesting and were more humane and more rich than other conversations you have. So did these people were also interested in you before? Did they like check up on you and see because you were like moving, you say slowly in the direction of de-radicalization? Did they like check? Did they like check up on you and try to see how are you getting along? Um,
you mean
like in terms of how have you changed yet? Because if you were like, let's say you were my friend, I'm talking to you and trying to convince you to leave these movements, I would like text you every now and then to try to figure out like how is Jeff doing? Is Jeff still has he talked himself back into this? Is he further away from it, etc.? Did they like was there a process where they were kind of evaluating how your de-radicalization process, or was it just like more individual conversations adding up?
Well, with Daryl, I met both of them when I was still involved.
Hmm.
And I didn't talk to Daryl until after I'd gotten out. And when he saw that I'd left, then he reached back out. I did have his phone number, but we didn't stay in touch. With Dia, we stayed in touch, and she was one of the people I could count on one hand that knew that I was planning on leaving.
Mm,
So I did have a bunch of follow-up conversations with her, and shared some of the things I was struggling with, during that time period. So
yeah. Okay, very interesting, Jeff. Let's go to Q&A, and I'll look for interesting questions and hopefully a critical one too. Hi, ultra testosterone. Just looking at all the questions. Mitch appreciates your advocacy. Mitch Kale. Um,
Thank you.
um, don't have an opinion. It's funny. Yeah. Yeah, Lucian Wolf points out that like Piccolini thought Sam Harris was far right, you know. And whenever people think of Sam Harris, it's absurd to equate him with neo-Nazis. Just silly. Mossad says most Israelis support the Republicans. I think that's probably true. I think that's almost certainly true. I've seen polling about like Donald Trump is very popular in Israel.
Oh yeah.
Deprogramming in principle is a kind of activism, ignoring it. History speaks renounce anti-white propaganda too. I'm very happy to do that, Mossad. And if you follow me on Twitter, I do that frequently. So I'm not afraid to do that. Um, okay, ultra testosterone. Most of the comments, unfortunately. I'll tell you when there's a question, Jeff. Ultra testosterone says Jeff seems decent. Dudes probably hate Jeff now. I think that's true. Mossad's talking about degenerates who demoralize the nation. I think we can skip past that one. Someone is making fun of me for not having many views. Blah blah blah. Okay, yeah. Jeff. Oh, here's a critical comment. Let's read it. Jeff is a grifter, not Matt. Thank you. Yeah, attacking you, Jeff, not me. Jeff is a trailer park skinhead, and he. Let's move past that. But I guess, how would you respond to people who call you? I'm not going to read all the insults, but how do you respond to people who call you a grifter? Just say you're disingenuous.
You know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Opinions are like, I don't want to cuss on the air, but
No, you can.
every opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. But you know, the thing is, the work that I'm doing now, I'm speaking out. I was on top where I was in my old life, and I started over with nothing. It would have been much easier to stay where I was at. So why the grift on this side of things? It doesn't
How
make
much did
sense.
you make when you were at the top of the National Socialist movement? Like, how financially lucrative did it
I'm not
become?
going to answer
You're not
that.
going to tell? Why not? Why not? Why don't you
No,
tell?
no, because people don't say what they make. Nobody says that.
Well, but it's. I mean, if you're repudiating this part of your past, I think it's. I mean, I wouldn't say. Actually, I probably would, honestly, if I made money from the channel. But yeah, okay. And you won't say how much now for you're getting compensated.
No,
Okay.
no, that was. I couldn't even ask my parents those questions. I'm not going to talk like
All
that.
right.
But
All right.
I was I was doing all right. I was not making money hand over fist, and I'm not certainly not now. I was better off financially before.
Okay.
That's the truth. Yeah.
I don't think you want to talk about. Luke Croft asked your thoughts on Mike Enoch. I think you didn't want to. Maybe to ask about TRS. What do you think of TRS? Because I know you don't want to focus on personalities, and I respect that. Because it does lead to drama and kind of our lower impulses, even though it can be fun. But do you have any thoughts on like the TRS group without talking about Mike as a person?
I really don't. I mean, they were at a couple of things that I was at the last couple of years I was involved, but I didn't have a lot of personal dealings with them or anything like that. So to me, it's just another
Mm-hmm.
movement group. So I don't really I mean, I hope everybody changes and they keep an open mind and I think just about anybody's capable of change. So I'm very careful not to unlike some some former extremists will call these guys knuckleheads and call them every name in the book or that sort of thing. I don't do that because these are just human beings, people that have made poor choices. If they're a psychopath or a sociopath, I got nothing nice to say. But for everybody else, I think it's just people that made poor choices and they're on the wrong path, and you can change that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people. My guess would be that far more people are just there's a lever they've pulled, as I said earlier, where they've inhibited their ability to be regular people towards some group, right? Blacks, Jews, or whatever. But they're not without the capacity for compassion. The point is for them to pull the lever back and allow them to have a more like thorough experience. Yeah, but obviously there's psychos, but I don't think that's the majority. Um,
It's not. It's not.
yeah. I'm laughing at some of the comments. Base Take says, seems like a good interview. Denying History says Japan is an awful society. No, I don't agree with that. You have to you have to view it holistically. you can't just Japan produces a lot of good fun stuff for the world. Um, Mossad says something I said was correct. I agree. Lawyer Tiger says woke slam dunk. I'm stealing that. Mossad says don't let Enoch bully you. I'm not gonna allow myself to be bullied. I mean, Jeff is, I look. Jeff is being cordial, so there's no reason to be intense toward him. Although I asked him tough questions. Isaiah gives a very positive comment to you. Jeff is so amazing. Love coming from Korea. He's so tempered now. I love the new vibe. Jeff, that's an interesting leads to question actually. Is your temperament different? Because I notice you're a pretty even keeled guy. You're not like the swaggering, posturing, tough guy that I would expect from a working class Nazi. Did your temperament change, or were you like this, just had with different views, with different politics, 5, 6 years ago? Or did your temperament change? Were you more vulgar? Were you more intense? Were you more picking fights? Because you seem pretty even keeled now.
I think I was pretty tempered, but when I look
Hmm.
back and I remember I was telling somebody, "Oh, we never said anything really, really hateful." And I was looking back at some of the stuff from the '90s, and I thought, "Uh-oh." Like, I
Hmm.
forgot. Like, I did not forget, but almost had to be reminded of some of that. Like, I was pretty radical back then. Like, I saw some demonstrations and things where I was carrying signs like, 6 million more and things like that, which in later years I didn't talk like that. So but I was definitely a lot more intense when I was involved in the movement, and that was I can tell you, like, different girls that I was dating and stuff, they would, a lot of times, if they weren't part of the movement, they would want to come along and see what was going on, and they say it's like night and day. Like, the person you are at home, is Jeff, but the person at the movement events is the commander. That's somebody
You were
different.
the commander. That was your title, the commander.
Yeah,
I guess like
yeah,
Rockwell was the commander, right?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's where we got it from. Yep.
Did they ever like Zig Heil you, or did they call you like Führer? Or were you like the absolute leader? Like, the Nazis had the Führer principle, so like they believed in like ultimate authority, a personality cult, attaching it to the personality. Were people doing that to you, or were you just like a guy who led them?
The NSM wasn't a democracy, so it was more of a dictatorship in that
Uh-huh.
sense. So if people had issues, and there's the door type of thing. So
Mm.
in a sense, we had that, but I didn't allow people to call me the Fuhrer. I didn't like that. I always
Did people
said
want to call you that?
it was here and there was some,
Yeah. I see. Yeah. All right. Let me see questions. Okay, this is a very interesting question. The cerebral fiction asked. Now, I'm gonna answer this too. I'm gonna let you answer Jeff first because you're the person that they want to hear from. Here's a question: is there anything that he thinks the neo Nazis are right about? That's your question, Jeff.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's a tough one. I had one girl that I knew, and I'm going to answer this kind of with a question because this is a tough one. She goes, "I'm not sure if I'm completely de-radicalized." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And she goes, "Well, I'm against pedophiles, and the movement protests against pedophiles." I said, "I'm against pedophiles too." I said, "A broken clock is still right 2 times a day." So of course there's some things in the movement that they stand for that are like that, that are good, but you can cherry pick those things out, and all the other dehumanizing people and things like that are not good. So,
Yeah, I
it's
mean
like with anything.
it's a monstrous criminal movement, but I would answer the question, yeah, they're right. I mean, they're right about some things other people aren't right about. The example I give is they talk about discrimination against whites, like CNN doesn't, and it exists. So they're wrong to call it a genocide or whatever. That's not true, right? That's completely absurd
Yeah.
statement. But like they're right that there is and if people say, "Oh, you're a Nazi, Matt," okay, you're done. First of all, you're really low IQ, but okay, whatever. You're saying that. But yeah, I think that let me first like this. Do you think that the things that they're right about, they use maybe, and that the mainstream society may not be right about, do they use those things to try to get you to believe in other things that are stupid, really?
Yeah, that's one
And
way
is
of
that
putting
like in your mind? Because in your mind you're like, wait, but CNN tells me it's bad to be hateful, but CNN also says, they say there's no such thing as anti-white racism. It doesn't exist. So I may not understand these claims about Jews. I may not feel like this is ethically right to talk about black people like this, but the Nazis must be right because CNN is lying about this other stuff. Was there like some kind of psychological mechanism like that? Maybe.
Yes, yes, and there was people that would come in and one issue people, like
Hmm.
people we were doing when I was involved, we were doing things on the border and border patrols and things like that, especially in like Arizona. And there was people that were coming in and saying, I never thought I would join the Nazis, but you guys are the only ones doing stuff on the border. So that was like a one issue thing. So you get those people would come in the door, and then you propagandize them with the rest of the stuff, and sometimes they wouldn't always come on board with all those different things, but sometimes they would come in on one issue, or somebody had a bad experience with a minority, or different people. Everybody had different reasons for joining. It wasn't, you can't put it in a box and just say, okay, it's all this. Like, I've seen de-radicalization so-called experts do that and say everybody that's in the movement, just about everybody, is there because of trauma. And it's like, oh my God, like, really? That's not even accurate. Like, where are you getting this
It
stuff?
sounds also apologetic because I'm not denying there aren't people like this, but there are.
There is.
But it sounds apologetic, and I bet you there are real claims of mistreatment by minorities. I bet you there also are are lies to try to give a noble sounding loss to the race hatred. So I'm not saying that these cases aren't real, but I have to say I wouldn't say they're false, but I would be skeptical if I heard a story of trauma because it does seem like narratively a very convenient way to give some kind of moral salience to their politics. Again, not saying it isn't true in some cases, but
Well,
I
I
would.
can tell you, like, one of the things that we did when we were involved in it is we'd find those horrible incidents, like in
Hmm.
South Africa where the farm murders were going on, and
Hmm.
the stuff you could there was
Hmm.
videos and stuff that I to this day I cannot get out of my
Yeah,
mind. There's you sometimes you see something that's so horrible it's stuck forever, and there's things like that are stuck. But instead of going not stuck, like I still believe that, yes, those horrible things have happened, that's real. But what the movement would do is exploit those things and be like, they're all like that. This could
yeah,
happen to you and your family. The hate is driven by fear, and fear is a powerful emotion, and it can drive that hate. So if you're afraid your family's under assault, or the white race is being genocided, or these type of things, and you believe that, you're darn right you're going to fight back and you're going to be against it. But that's not the way the world is. That's not the majority. That's like, there's bad people in all cultures, and there's bad people that do terrible things to one another, and it's those people, not it's not that racial group or that religion or anything like that. It's those bad individuals, and people, so it is, a lot of it is psychological, really.
right. See if we got some more questions. Cerebral fiction says, "Don't skip my question. What the fuck? Where the fuck was your question?" Oh, this is an interesting question. So I'll translate to you. Would you agree? I don't know if you know who Nathan Coffness is, but would you agree with like a race realist view of race still? Because I assume you had that view when you were, although plenty of people have it who are not neo-Nazis or white supremacists. But would you agree with that, or would you disagree with it?
I don't know who he is, though.
Oh no, I'm talking about race realism. Like the idea of genetic differences that are um, pertinent for social outcomes like education, intelligence, and so on. Um,
Mm,
that's what the guy's asking.
um I don't I don't think so. I don't think
Mhm.
that I think, yes, there's certain genetic things like genetic diseases and things like that different people are more prone to, of different races, and there's some facts that can back that up. But as far as intelligence and things like that, I don't believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say my instinct, and I admit I'm politically biased, but my instinct is to be skeptical of that. That social science can really give us insights into genetic differences with respect to intelligence. I talk about that with Nathan Coffness, but I will say this: I haven't researched the question enough to have a deeply informed view, and I think people should have free speech in this, and I don't think it's the same as Nazis to have views like Coffness, but my politics and the little reading I have done on the subject puts me in the same camp as you, Jeff. Um, any other questions? I don't think I'm going to ask. He doesn't believe in Holocaust denial, so I'm not going to ask him that. He said he doesn't. Oh, interesting. This is a good question from Lawyer Tiger. Question: Did you or your comrades ever knowingly create fake memes, fake quotes, fake conspiracies, etc., about Jews, other minority groups because you believe the ends justify the means. In other words, did you knowingly lie about Jews in pursuit of what you consider to be a broader truth, right? Um,
Not no, not that I can think of. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. That's really interesting.
well,
But
I see
no,
all these online, all of these. I'm not Jewish, by the way, but I have a lot of Jewish viewers because of my Holocaust denial stuff. I see all of this shit. It's like fake. It's like some Jew said this, some Jew is doing that, and it's a huge percentage is just fake. So, but you guys didn't actually make shit up. You just had these false, kind of more general beliefs, but not like you're not like making shit up about a person
no, I don't
consciously.
recall making up
Yeah.
no, consciously making up anything. Because I think if you're doing something like that and you're making stuff up, then you must know that you're wrong, deep down
Yeah.
inside, or there's something that's saying that you're wrong. And I believed what I was standing for, because I was an ideologue. I was
Hmm.
standing for something that I believed in. And when I no longer believed in it, I couldn't keep going. Yeah, I could have, but that's just not who I am as a person. It's just not, that's why I speak out.
Yeah. Um. Anything else? All right, gentlemen, or ladies, if there were ladies, it's a pretty male chat, unsurprisingly. Um, Mossad says the group you left were a bunch of degenerates. I don't think that would be how you describe it, Jeff. I think you'd have a more positive view, not of the movement. You're negative toward the movement, but of the people, a more hopeful view of the people. Okay, guys, 10 seconds. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to ask another question, and if not, I'm going to probably sign off. So. I'll give you 20 seconds. So just going to let chat do its thing. Let's see if it does its thing. If not, we'll say goodnight. All right. It looks like we're done with questions. So Jeff, thanks so much. It was a good interview. It was fun. It was interesting to see your perspective, and I hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks for
And
having me on.
yeah, is there anything you want actually no, is there anything you want to say about where to find you, what kind of work you're doing, and what your hopes for the rest of your life are really in your activism?
Yeah, for sure. If people are interested in checking out what we're doing, jeffscoop.com or beyondbarriersusa.org is our organization. And one of the things that I do is I'm real concerned about preventing bias and hatred and things like that. So I'm in with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. We go and we talk to schools, we talk to middle schools, high schools, colleges, you name it, all over the country and different parts of the world as well. And we try to get out there and make a difference. In November, I was at the Nobel Peace Center with Dia Khan, and we spoke
Hmm.
there as well in Oslo. So we're trying to, promote relational dialogue and trying to, get the message out all over the world. And the thing is, it's not about me, but everybody that's out there, you can change. So if you feel like maybe the path that you're on isn't the right one, think about all of the things, the damage that it can do. And we didn't even get into it in this in this conversation, but what it does to your families and your loved ones and your people around you, your children. It has such a negative effect when you're involved in something that's so toxic. You might think that you're uplifting them, and I mean, I was willing to lay my life down on the line for this cause. And um and instead, all I did was damage my family and everybody around me. So don't make the same mistakes I did, and don't be in it for 25 years and then be the guy that's on the other side here talking about, hey, don't do this, it's a bad idea. Use this as a lesson, and what not to do. And don't be afraid of it either. I mean, you made bold choices to get involved in this stuff in the first place. You got that strength, that inner strength, you can make it back out.
It's a good way to put a bow on this conversation, Jeff. And while yeah, you shouldn't be the guy who's in the Nazi movement for 27 years. If you have been in it for 27 years, you should be doing what you're doing, in my view. So, all right, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And history speaks out, essentially. Okay, I'm gonna just close down the stream. End stream.